Books and One Click Digital present The Desert and the Blade, a novel of the change, by S.M. Stirling. Narrated by Todd McLaren. Prologue. David the Gutter, in the dialect of the Cut-Nose tribe of Los Altos, it sounded more like Dave the Gutter, wasn't insane, strictly speaking. Not on the common run of things, that was. But right now his thoughts weren't as clear as usual, while he stared at the bottom of the canoe and waited for the time to attack. He listened to the buzz of insects and the breathing of so many fighters, smelling their stink and the heavy silt and decay scent of the salt marsh. His parents and grandparents had been mad, until his father met a mud-hare band who flayed and ate him over days, and his mother stepped out from the 15th story of the ruined Palo Alto office tower because she heard voices telling her to. Dave had taken mud-hare heads to stand on spears and watch his father's funeral feast, though their meat had been rather stringy, even baked underground in a pit full of embers and heated stones, and lavishly dressed with one of the last precious sealed jars of scavenged barbecue spice rub. Apart from the blood power, he actually preferred venison or wild pig. He had buried his mother's body by collapsing a leaning wall over a hole in the cracked concrete, and squatted brooding for hours, inchoate thoughts for which he had no words trickling through his mind. He'd gripped the haft of his axe hard enough to make his fingers ache, wishing there was an enemy he could smash down, and then he'd howled and slashed the air until the feral macaques had fled chittering up the vine-grown ruins. The squat, heavily muscled Cut-Nose was at home in the world the change had left him, and he'd never believed much of the stories of the old time. Partly that was the fact that the thick, gobbling variety of English he'd grown up with had a severely limited vocabulary. The founders of his folk had deliberately avoided thought as much as they could, to keep despair and self-loathing at bay. Mostly it was because his world was the overgrown ruins of what had once been Palo Alto and its neighbors, the little clans of the Cut-Noses, and the endless game of stalking and feasting that gave their lives meaning. He was the most feared of all the chiefs, the one who'd extended the sway of those who bore the 3 horizontal scars on their noses over all the southeastern part of the peninsula. It was he who'd seen that the new enemies north of the bridge, the ones with the stars and trees on their frighteningly subtle gear, and the dirt pushers they guarded, were not just a new tribe. They were a threat to all the tribes. It was he, puzzling endlessly over a captured ranger bow, who'd whittled out a duplicate from lumps of wood and the tips of skis. His people valued him so highly they'd nursed him through the injuries he'd sustained when he avenged his father, tempting him with morsels of grilled mud-hare liver during his illness. As he waited, bent over in the ancient aluminum canoe, he was still puzzling over why he'd listened to the tox-in-head meat who'd led him here. His dialect also used the same word for outsider and food. He was silent and still. All his folk could be silent and still, or they would have died young. Even children who cried out of season had to be killed, despite the constant, desperate need for more fighters and mothers. It was not good to talk much. It had just seemed good to do what the meat who could walk in your head told them to do. The way it felt good to rot and eat and kill and sleep and wake. The way things should be, always would be. But when he tried to think why it was good, his mind stuttered, like his step did now in cold weather, or when he was very tired. One reason he'd stayed a chief, was that he could think himself.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.